welcome back to this week's edition of Tiger Talkers on the Prairie. I'm here with Isabel from third hour?
First hour. We kind of got stuck together because of being absent and things of that sort. So this is going to be a mismatched podcast involving dress code, I think, and the communication on the Titanic.
So messy.
Yeah, it's kind of messy, but we'll do our best.
So my group going into it, our discussion of choice was about dress code, and my section was pretty much the cons of such, and it says like what are the cons and how they affect the students. And so some of the cons are that it's discriminatory and sexist, mainly towards women, because there have been instances where schoolgirls are brought to detention or get reprimanded because of length of skirts, while boys aren't getting the same treatment or punished for like simply misbehaving.
That's actually something that I see a lot at our school even, because I remember once I got dress coded because I had like one rip on my jeans above my knee.
And it's more common in men to like, we have a code where you can't wear like 2 or more articles of the same color, and they just get like warned for it or something, but we have to call home or get suspended for anything further than that.
Yeah.
And another is that it takes away from said like self-expression. It like curtails the rights of girls and boys' expressions, and it can be costly depending on how strict the code is. And school uniforms can be a part of dress code, which can be costly as well. Also, if the school dress code is that strict, certain clothes can be more expensive than others, which I've seen in schools when my study is outside of the state, that they have school dress codes that are strictly made out of certain fabrics that are more expensive.
Yeah, and I think I've had a friend before, like an hour away in Pueblo, and their school didn't have like a uniform per se, but they did have a dress code where they had to have slacks and polo t-shirts, which were actually more costly.
Yeah.
And
then because of those cons, it affects students more than you'd think for something as small as a dress code, and students can feel bullied by their own school. Girls especially, back to the discrimination, because this could lead to social and emotional problems caused by the school itself, which is supposed to protect you from said bullying in the first place. And parents can be upset too when all of this money is going into shopping for their child's clothes just to hang in their closets to waste away just because of a dress code or because it doesn't have appropriate sleeves according to the adults of the school.
I've heard a lot before that like girls get really upset because they discriminate more against the girls who don't play sports, they say, because a lot of times girls will walk around in like their workout shorts that are pretty shorts, that are really small, and they don't hear anything about it, and the other girls get pretty upset about that.
I'm an athlete too, and I've seen what Isabel's talking about and referring to. I know it's against dress code, but I've seen like coaches will be like, oh, it's okay, or like administrators will be, oh, because they have practice, it's acceptable. But if somebody who wasn't going to a practice or just got now, it'd be red flags everywhere and everybody's getting in trouble. Lastly, expressing themselves in school through clothes may have essential life lessons in building a self-esteem, because you learn self-esteem like learning how to deal with the judgment in your choice of outfits, which is applicable to like many things throughout life. You're gonna have to make choices, even as small as like choosing what you're gonna wear, but it builds that self-esteem and that self-confidence to where you can be confident in your choices. And
it helps you like individualize yourself and grow up as a person, because you discover yourself through clothing even, because it's one of the few things at school that you do differently from other people.
I agree. So in conclusion, school dress codes hinder students' ability to express themselves at school and allow discrimination to be prevalent. Students should be allowed to express themselves in such a way that they can enjoy while working their minds so hard at school.
I completely agree. So like, moving on to my section of the podcast, the Titanic had discrimination as well, I think is the best way to tie into it.
Yeah.
Because looking at what happened with the Titanic and when it actually went down, the most people who died, I guess, were the lower class, people from the lower income. And a lot of that had to do with communication on the Titanic as well. It was probably its biggest downfall. Was the lack of being able better system of communication, it might have actually finished its voyage.
I agree, because the discrimination was mainly because of the time the Titanic happened. I mean, it was kind of inevitable because that was acceptable in society. But if they communicated better throughout, like, the corridors of the boat or whatever, they would have at least had more of a fighting chance to get out of the bottom, because of discrimination, they're in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah, and I feel like the communication, if it would have been better, the discrimination might not have mattered as much, and everyone could have ended up living in the end.
I agree.
So as far as the communication they did have on the Titanic, because they did have a wireless form of communication, it just wasn't perfected yet, I guess you could say. So they had 2 radio officers, or as they also called them, telegraphists, and they were in charge of keeping the Titanic, like, log, I guess, for people on shore. So they kept them notified of where they were and how close they were getting. So the guy in charge was John Jack G. Phillips, and he was, yeah, I know, right? And he was working with Harold Bride, I believe, and he was the second in command on that, because there were only 2 of them. And the distress call, I have it right here, this was it exactly. It was, I require immediate assistant, position 41.46 north, 50.14 west, and then it was received by Celtic Coronia, I believe, to NBC and SOS. So the Titanic did communicate that they were in distress and that they'd hit an iceberg. However, because they lost communication shortly after this, it was a lot harder to get the help that they needed in time.
And like today, we have cell phones available to us at just the snap of the fingers, and we see how communications help us get through, like, certain problems like that. Like, in airplanes and stuff, similar to the boat, if they're going down, they right away just send out that message and we're aware of it. And, like, when something happens, like, just even with teenagers now, you're always supposed to have your phone in case anything happens, because the difference that 2 seconds can make now is a lot different too.
Oh yeah, and it's really interesting too to look at things like the Malaysia Airlines incident, where we couldn't do anything even with all this communication because we just lost them entirely.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's still a problem, but I think it's a lot better now.
I agree.
And so within the distress call, they also mentioned something, an abbreviation, CQD. And people often think it means come quick danger, but essentially it's just a call meaning distress, and it doesn't really have any connotations other than that. So the problems with the communication were specifically, like, around when they hit the iceberg, because before that they were pretty okay, even without being able to communicate. And so they did have a form of wireless communication invented by, I'm gonna butcher this name, but Guglielmo Marconi, and it was called Marconi Wireless, and it was essentially a radio system, but it wasn't quite as perfected as wireless radio after the Titanic was. And so they couldn't communicate very quickly, and with the passing ships, what had happened was they would send messages back and forth, but they'd be sending them at the same time, so it would jam the radio systems, and they couldn't get their messages through.
So I believe communication definitely played a huge role.
Oh yeah, it was really devastating, and it ended up causing the Radio Act of 1912, which essentially says that the United States federal law mandated all radio stations in the United States be licensed by the federal government and always be on the lookout for distress calls from vessels on the sea.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And it
Huge.
So I mean, the Titanic was tragic, but I feel like it was a much needed change in wireless communication.
Yeah.
It brought about a lot of good changes for us, and
heightened awareness of the possibilities that can happen due to
it was. So just to wrap it up, I mean, I feel like the Titanic was was tragic, but I feel it was sort of necessary for us to move forward in the process of, I don't know, making communication more viable.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so until next week on Tiger Talkers of the Prairie.